All right, hey, let's work through one more example. I wanted to point out that there's some vocab in the book that we are not talking about in these videos. So I do fully expect that you will read the book as well as watch these videos. At the end of the homework assignment, numbers 23 and 24 are the last two problems I assigned you. And those are some true and false questions. I should talk a little bit more about those later, but I just want to point out that there's some vocab in there that you'll have to go back and look at the book to read. So anyway, let's look at this particular system. It's in old school X, Y, and Z. We know in linear algebra we'd call that X1, X2, X3. But really, even more than that in linear algebra, we would just probably jump straight to the matrix. So let's enter the matrix. 1, 2, -2, -15. This will be an augmented matrix because we're including that last column. 2, 1, -5, -21, 1, -4, 1, 18. Now we'll use our 3 elementary row operations. We know those are still basically the things we did back in algebra, but now we won't have to do quite so much writing of the x's, y's, equal signs, all that stuff. We can just get down to the fundamentals of this problem. So keep in mind my first step was to put zeros below the diagonal. And it turns out that's only half the process. So I'll tell you about the other half as we finish this problem. So let's start with that though. Let's put zeros below the diagonal. I think my first step is to put a 0 right here. We always start with the first column on the left. And that looks like I will need -2 of row 1 added to row 2, which will become the new row 2. I'm not sure I'm going to write every single one of those out like that, but I'll start with that. So first row is not going to change. -2 of row 1 added to row 2. Here we go. So that'd be -2 plus 2, which will become 0. That'd be -4 plus 1, -3. +4 plus -5 is -1. And 30. +30 minus 21 is 9. Okay. Now let's work on putting a 0 in that spot. So that would just be -1 of the first row added to the third row. I guess I'll write that down one more time. -1 of row 1 plus row 3 will become the new row 3. I have some students that write these steps down every single time all quarter long, and that's great. If that's how you keep track of what's going on, you probably make less mistakes that way. A lot of people stop writing this down after a while. But anyway, so -1 of row 1 added to row 3. So -1 and 1 is 0. -2 and -4 is -6. +2 and +1 is +3. 15 plus 18 is 33. Okay, my next step is going to be putting a 0 right there. So I think I'll start writing the matrix again. So 1, 2, -2, -15, 0, -3, -1, 9. Okay, now let's work on this third row. So it'll be -2 of the second row added to the third row. So 0, -2 times -3 is +6, plus -6, 0. Let's see, where am I? -2 of okay, so yeah. So +2 plus +3 is 5. And -2 times 9 is -18. Plus 33 is 15. Okay, we could stop here. I think it's pretty easy to put the x, y's, and z's back on now. This last equation just says 5z equals 15, which makes it pretty easy to solve for z is 3. Then we could go back to the second line, and since we already know that z is 3, it wouldn't be too hard to find y. And once we know z and y, it wouldn't be too hard to find x from the first equation. But let's go the full Monty here. Let's say the next step would be to put 1s on the diagonal. And that's kind of an optional step. And then the remaining step, whether or not we choose to do that one, is to put 0s above the diagonal. So let's at least put a 1 right there. I've already got a 1 there on the diagonal. Let's put 1 there. I'm not going to put a 1 on the middle entry of the diagonal. I'm not going to put it here. I'll talk about why in a second. But keep in mind, one of our row operations is we're allowed to multiply any row we want by a constant. So I'm going to multiply the third row by 1/5. So just to write that out again, it'll be 1/5 times row 3 will become the new row 3. So 1, 2, -2, -15, 0, -3, -1, 9, 0, 0, 1, 3. Okay. So that was my sort of modified version of putting 1s on the diagonal. I put 1s at 2 places on the diagonal. I definitely have 0s below the diagonal. So my last goal right here is to put 0s above the diagonal. To do that, I'm going to start on the right-hand side of the coefficients. So I'm going to work on putting a 0 there and a 0 there. And then finally I'll work on putting a 0 there. And then I really will be done. Okay, so notice that if I add row 3 as is to row 2, I'll get a 0 where I want one. So row 3 plus row 2 will become the new row 2. So row 3 will stay the same, 0, 0, 1, 3. Adding row 3 to row 2 will give me 0, -3, 1 plus -1 is 0, and 3 plus 9 is 12. Okay, to get a 0 in that spot, I'll want to add 2 of row 3 to row 1. So 2 of row 3 plus row 1 will become the new row 1. Okay, so 2 of row 3, so 0, 2 of 0 is still 0, added to 1. 0, 2 of 0 is still 0, added to 2. 2 times 1 is 2, added to -2 is 0. And 2 times 3 is 6, added to -15 is -9. I have 0s in these 2 spots. I still want a 0 right here in that spot. And now's the point where I'm going to finish putting 1s on the diagonal. I didn't do it before because it was going to give me a fraction. I didn't like that. But now that this 0 is here, I am going to go ahead and multiply row 2 by -1/3. And I'm going to save myself a little bit of writing here. I'm just going to go old school and say that would become positive 1, and this would become negative 1/3 times 12 will become negative 4. Okay, now I'm going to go on and put my 0 in my last spot right there. And notice now that I can just add negative 2 of row 2 to row 1. Make that my new row 1. And I'm going to go over here for that. Squeeze it in on the side. Okay, bottom row is staying the same. 0, 0, 1, 3. Row 2 is actually staying the same, so let me write it properly. 0, 1, 0, negative 4. And my only goal right now is to add negative 2 of row 2 to row 1. So negative 2 times 0 is still 0. Add it to 1 is still 1. That's good. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. Added to 2 is 0. And then negative 2 times 0 is still 0. Add to 0 is still 0. That's good. And finally, negative 2 times negative 4 is positive 8. Added to negative 9 is negative 1. Okay, I am fully done now, and we have the answer, even if you don't know it yet. But notice I have put zeros below the diagonal. I eventually ended up with 1s on the diagonal. And I have zeros above the diagonal as well. So now is finally my time to put the variables back on, to translate it out of matrix form back into equation form. And I guess since we never went to x1, x2, x3, I'll go back to x, y, z, since that's what we started with. So notice as I write this first equation back down, filling in x, y, z equals sign, it literally just says 1x, or x, equals negative 1. And the next one just says 1y, or y, equals negative 4. And the third one just says z equals 3. That is nice. Especially this is going to become nice when we get a little more efficient and we can jump from here to here. That'll be boom. We can just say, hey, do all the grunt work for me, get right to this finished form, and I'll be able to read the answers right off of it. This finished form, by the way, is often referred to as the RREF form. You might have that on your calculator somewhere. Again, I'm going to encourage you to do tonight's homework by hand. I say, please do tonight's homework by hand, just because we want to get this process really locked into the brain before we start letting the calculator do it for us. That'll help when we get x's and y's and r's and j's and complex numbers and other sorts of weird things in here that your calculator can't handle. Anyway, RREF stands for Reduced Row Echelon Form. You don't really need to know that, but that's where it comes from. And this format where we have zeros below the diagonal, zeros above the diagonal, and 1s on the diagonal, that is called reduced row echelon form. And it's the form that makes it very easy to see the solutions. Okay, I think with that, you should be fully prepared for 1.1 homework. And really, we've done a lot of the work for 1.2 homework as well. But there's a couple new things to add in there. So tackle the homework. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm always available for a Zoom or for email. And I'll see you in section 1.2.